Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, February 9th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about former Governor Larry Hogan from the state of Maryland now announcing a surprise and shocking United States Senate bid in the 2024 election season. With just months away till the primary, Larry Hogan has officially entered into the race in what many people see as a last-ditch effort by the Republican Party to win back control of the United States Senate through many different pathways, Maryland being one of them. Now, to provide you a bit more context as to who Governor Hogan is, if you aren't super aware of his presence within the state of Maryland, he is the last Republican governor who was first elected in 2014 in a surprise and upset victory against then the Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown. Anthony Brown now serves as the state attorney general and served multiple terms in Congress. And so when running in the 2014 race, Democrats were very hopeful that they would be able to maintain control. Martin O'Malley, who ran for president in 2016, had previously served as the governor of Maryland, with Anthony Brown again as his lieutenant governor, but this victory here was more of a referendum against President Obama and a big display of Republican support across the state of Maryland, one that no Democrats really expected. But Larry Hogan was far from an extremist Republican. He was long seen as a moderate, as someone who would work with the state legislature, and someone who was seen as bipartisan and willing to cross party lines. And so that landed him a very solid re-election in 2018, in which he defeated the former NAACP president Ben Jealous by over 10 points in the 2018 midterm elections. The unique thing about the 2018 midterm elections is that it was an overwhelmingly positive year for Democrats. They picked up numerous seats in the House, in fact, won back House control, maintained a number of United States Senate seats in states that Donald Trump had won in the election just 2 years prior, and on the governor elections in 2018, Democrats were making pickups all across the country. But they couldn't crack Maryland. And Maryland, again, for further context, is a state that Democrats have not won by less than 20 points in over a decade now on the presidential and in every single subsequent Senate election. And so when you see the fact that Larry Hogan was able to break through and win by double digits in a blue wave year, one would argue, does that mean he has a good shot at the United States Senate? Now, I'm here to say from the very beginning that I believe that Larry Hogan has no shot at the United States Senate. I think there are implications about whether or not, Larry Hogan will be taken seriously as a candidate, but fundamentally, he does not win control of this Senate seat for the GOP. I do not see a reality, regardless of who the Democratic nominee is, that Democrats lose this Senate seat, especially in a presidential election year. Now, Larry Hogan has represented a different type of politics than the mainstream GOP right now. He was very much aligned with the Mitt Romney and John McCain-esque type of the party when he first was elected in 2014. And at that point in time, our country had been less polarized, and there wasn't as much of a stark difference between Democrats and Republicans. And fundamentally, Larry Hogan, as I was mentioning, was perceived as a moderate and did govern as one, which is the reason why he was so popular when he left office in 2022. But the thing is, his track record is a bit wonky. In this election cycle, he endorsed Nikki Haley for president, and we all know exactly how that race is going. He's aligned himself with losing candidates, including in his own race with Kelly Schultz, who ran for Maryland governor, who had been closely associated with Larry Hogan, who decided that she was going to run for governor as the only candidate to, quote, continue his legacy, and then by the end of it, she ended up losing to a candidate who Donald Trump endorsed over her. And it showed that Larry Hogan's grip on the party was beginning to weaken. Up across the nation, Larry Hogan had been perceived as this rhino, as someone that was Republican in name, but not in practice. And that was a problem for Larry Hogan, and is going to prove to be a problem in this election cycle now that he's pivoting and deciding to run for Senate. I think when we take a look at where we are when it comes down to the U.S. Senate run, when we take a look at the Maryland Senate race, Maryland in totality, and the presidential race that is coming up upon us, it becomes less and less likely to anyone that this state is going to budge, especially in the Republican column. This isn't 2014, and this certainly isn't a race in which Democrats are expecting to lose any type of top ticket or down ballot race across this state. It's going to be solidly blue, and that's a reality that Larry Hogan needs to confront. But I think when we take a closer look and a more narrow lens on these Senate races, we also realize that like Larry Hogan with his losing track record with Nikki Haley and Kelly Schultz and many other decisions, even not even voting for Donald Trump in the 2016 or 2020 election, you find that Larry Hogan falls from grace in terms of somebody who previously might have been seen as this top ticket contender in an upcoming election bid. When you look at the 2024 hopefuls back in 2017 and 2018, Larry Hogan wasn't really considered to be a hopeful for 2020. He was continuing out to serve his term in the Maryland governor's office, but 2020 2024 seemed to always be on the radar. But as I was saying, there has been a culture shift within the GOP quite significantly that makes Larry Hogan as a person not exactly someone who's too, palpable or someone who can actually win in an election, especially in a GOP primary. And so when I take a look at the 2024 Senate race, I am often reminded of the Phil Bredesen race back in 2018 when he ran for Senate in the state of Tennessee as a very, very well-approved and well-liked governor, but not as good to be a national candidate, somebody who would represent the Democratic Party on the national stage and represent Tennessee in the United States Senate. And 2018 is that year that I keep coming back to, largely because of Larry Hogan's re-election, but also because it provided beautiful commentary about what it would be like to run as a former popular governor, but still someone who can't win statewide in a race that matters and has national implications. In 2018, Phil Bredesen, as someone who won every single county in his election in 2006, left office in early 2011 as a very popular and well-respected governor, ran for Senate, received endorsements from very notable people, including many Republicans, including Taylor Swift. This was the first time she made a major presence on the political arena, and I know we are seeing a lot of discussion and conversation around her. I just thought it was uniquely interesting that this was the race where she had the first bit of impact. But Phil Bredesen, as the governor in this state, again, was adored and respected, and someone who many Democrats genuinely believed that, he could actually win this Senate race. And so what happened was there was a lot of conversation around him. The Republican Party funneled tens of millions of dollars across a number of races just like this one, including the Tennessee Senate race, because the polling early on had indicated that he was popular, that people liked him, and that he would stand a chance at winning in a deep, deep red state. It's a state as red as Maryland is blue. But what we realized very closely to Election Day is that regardless of how popular he was still fundamentally a Democrat, and voters in Tennessee could not stomach electing a Democrat to the United States Senate. But the last time we saw this happen on a presidential election was actually in the state of Montana, when Steve Bullock, who also ran for president in 2020, ran for governor in 2016, ran for re-election actually after being first elected in 2012, decided he was going to run for re-election in 2016 alongside the same ballot as Donald Trump. And despite Donald Trump winning the state by 21 percentage points, Steve Bullock won by 4. But here's the problem. 4 years later, he decided to run for United States Senate, and despite being at the time not only a popular governor, but actually the incumbent, he still lost to the Republican opponent in this race by around 10 points. And we can look no further than the fact that Donald Trump won this state nationally by around 16. And so it really was not a conducive environment for the state of Montana, or arguably in 2018, the state of Tennessee, to flip to the other side of the aisle, no matter who was running in the race. We've seen this story told time and time again, where a popular governor has an ego boost and a high level of, political electability on the sides of their consultants and people who are close to them that say, you know what, you can actually do this, when in reality, we know that they can't. The last example I will give you is the 2012 United States Senate race in the state of Hawaii, a race in which Republicans really should have realized they would have no chance of winning, especially considering Barack Obama, at the time President Obama, had been winning in this state, by excessively large margins. This is a state that John Kerry won by less than 10 points. In 2008, went to Obama by nearly 40, so you see the swing there was over 30%. But in 2012, Republicans ran Linda Lingle. If you don't recognize her name, it's probably because you shouldn't. She was very popular in the state of Hawaii, but only around the 2002 and 2006 election season. In 2006, she won everywhere across the state, got 63% of the vote as a Republican, and the interesting thing about this year is similar to 2018, it was a blue wave year. And so Hawaii, in theory, should have been an overwhelmingly Democratic state, but it wasn't, and it went red. And so that gave a hyper sense of inflation, right? Or it inflated the egos of the Republicans in this state that they would actually have a shot at flipping a nationalized race, one like the Senate race. But as we found out with Phil Bredesen, as we found out with Steve Bullock, as Larry Hogan is soon going to find out, Linda Lingle found out in 2012 when she got just 37% of the vote in a state where at the time she was still riding off as a very, very popular and well-known governor in the state. And so now that Larry Hogan is deciding that he's going to run for United States Senate, it clears all expectations or any considerations that, one, he was running for the Republican nomination. That really was cleared after the filing deadlines passed and he endorsed Nikki Haley, but also that he might run for president under the no labels ticket. This Senate bid seems to be something that Larry Hogan will probably, and I say that with caution, probably win the nomination for and move to the general election, but again, will have no clear shot at victory. The concern here I have for Democrats, though, is that they are already strapped for resources. This is the current state of the 2024 Senate map, and we already know on this alone that Republicans are going to to win West Virginia. And that brings Democrats to 50 and Republicans to 50, which means everything is determined by the presidency. Democrats need to win. Joe Biden, quite frankly, needs to win so Vice President Harris can break the tie in the United States Senate. There is no other way, if everything else stays the way it is characterized, that Democrats maintain Senate control. They are not going to win Texas. They are not going to win Florida, and every other state is as red can be. And so when we take a look at who is going to determine these competitive states, it's very obvious that some of these Democratic states are going to be up for grabs for the GOP. States like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, states that you are certainly going to see a very dominant and heavy GOP presence. Democrats will make Texas a little bit more competitive. They'll probably lose it by around 5, 6, 7 points, enough so that it requires Republicans to divest resources to Ted Cruz there, especially after his 2018 embarrassing, win there by just 2.6%. Not at all impressive, if you ask me, and Ted Cruz, I'm sure you can tell, because 6 years prior, he was winning by 15, 16 points. But when you take a look at these 8 competitive races, the one thing they all have in common is that, or 7 out of the 8, the one thing they all have in common is that Democrats have incumbents here. Ted Cruz is the only Republican incumbent that is in a competitive state right now, and that is the state of Texas. But what Democrats desperately need to avoid is leaning into the idea that Maryland could join this column. I think it makes sense for a lot of these other states. Montana and Ohio are states that Donald Trump won, but Democrats need to defend. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, absolutely competitive states. But Maryland, of all states, is not a state that Democrats need to be spending any resources on. The Democrats in this race, David Trone and Angela Alsobrooks, the two frontrunners for the Democratic nomination right now, are fundraising on this right now. And I think a lot of that is going to be money that is going to be used in the Democratic primary, which makes a lot of sense. But towards the general election, Democrats must avoid this idea that Maryland at all is going to narrow up. This is a story that has been told time and time again. We know from historical context, we know from current context, and we certainly know from the current state and polarization state of our nation that this state is simply not going to be competitive. Democrats are at a point where they can entirely ignore Larry Hogan's candidacy and do it for the better of their party, and I think they absolutely should. The Republican Party is going to sensationalize this, make this a race that Democrats divest money that they could be spending in other battleground states and other battleground Senate seats. I think there are plenty of ways that this could go wrong. And not saying that Republicans in any reality really win this race, but that they divert resources away enough that Republicans win other ones. Can you imagine a reality in which you see someone like Jon Tester, the senator of Montana, losing his race by 3,000, 4,000 votes, but Democrats spent 10 to 20 million in the state of Maryland? That will be something that people will look back upon and say, why in the world would we do this? Well, it makes sense. Republicans did the exact same thing in 2018 when it came down to the Senate race in Tennessee. Arguably, there was a bit more data that was substantiating, a consideration here that Democrats would lose or Democrats could potentially win in this race. It also was a blue wave year. 2024 is not shaping up to be a red wave year. It would also be different if it was a midterm versus a presidential election year. But what I think you are going to see is that Democrats are going to potentially make this mistake where they are spending money in races that they already know they're going to win. And so I would keep an eye out on Maryland. I would keep an eye out to see how is this race going to go. Are the Democrats leading by an overwhelming amount? The only reality in which Larry Hogan even comes into a point where he makes this race competitive if it gets narrower than 10 points. And I do not see a circumstance in which that happens, especially since he only has been tried and tested on a governor ballot successfully. He did run for Congress against Steny Hoyer, somebody who has served in Democratic leadership, actually was the majority leader when Democrats had the majority in the House of Representatives. Larry Hogan ran against him. He narrowed up that race. That was a race the Democrats pretty consistently win by 20, 30 points. Larry Hogan brought it down to 10, but that was that's a very long time ago. And what you find here too is that Larry Hogan had a claim to that district. His dad had represented it before Steny Hoyer came in, and people recognized the last name. They will recognize the last name, but I do not think it will come to any point in which Democrats lose this race, and they should not feed into the narrative that Maryland is competitive. And so as we look ahead to the end of the 2024 election season, I caution everyone watching this video and both parties to not lean into this idea that Maryland will be competitive. I think it's a very interesting concept that Larry Hogan is deciding to run for Senate and not any other elected office. I think he would have a lot better of a chance at some other statewide elected position in 2026. But at the end of the day, his name won't be ruined by the Senate run, but I do think his chances of electability absolutely will. There are decisions that should be made and shouldn't be made, and this is one that I think, if I was advising the former governor, I would have advised against this decision because it is doomed to fail from the very beginning. Democrats should not at all be worried about the state of Maryland, the state of this race. Larry Hogan simply is not going to win it because a nationalized race, despite how popular a governor may be, just simply isn't going to flip parties in a year that Joe Biden is on track to win this state by 25 to 30 points. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.